Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so if you're grappling with that final chapter in comparative politics, chapter 12, challenges and questions, well, you're in the right place.
Absolutely. This chapter really tries to pull everything together, doesn't it? And it starts with this core problem.
Yeah, the state, the thing we've been focusing on all semester, it's kind of being squeezed from all sides.
That's it exactly.
hmm
Traditionally, politics is all about the state, the main actor. But now, the stage is way more crowded.
Crowded how?
Well, you've got non-state actors popping up everywhere, like terrorist groups, sure, but also big international criminal networks. And then there are these huge supranational bodies.
Like the UN or the EU.
Precisely. And they're stepping in, sometimes taking over jobs the state used to handle exclusively, like public health responses or even setting economic rules.
Okay, so that's pressure from outside or sort of above. But it's happening inside states too, right?
Definitely. Huge pressure from within. You see demands for more autonomy, maybe regional governments wanting more power. That's
Yeah.
devolution.
Or even groups wanting to break away entirely. Secession.
Yes, often along ethnic lines or racial lines. We've seen conflicts flare up around this in places like, well, Ethiopia recently, or there are ongoing tensions in India.
So, with all this pulling and pushing from outside and inside, plus global stuff like pandemics messing with supply chains, does comparing states even make sense anymore? Is the framework still useful?
It's a fair question. But the sources we're looking at argue pretty strongly, actually, that yes, it's not just relevant, it's maybe more crucial now.
More crucial, why?
Because despite everything, the state is still the main player. Think about COVID. Who really ran the show?
Individual governments, mostly. Lockdowns, vaccines.
Exactly. Even within the EU, where you'd expect coordination, the main responses were national. And crucially, we immediately started comparing them. How did Germany do versus France, or the US versus Canada?
Ah, okay. So the comparison itself proves the state is still the key unit we look at. It's just caught in this bind.
That's the word. A paradox. Pressure from above, that's globalization. And pressure from below, fragmentation.
Right, and there's that concept from Benjamin Barber back in the 90s, jihad versus McWorld.
Yeah, a really powerful idea. McWorld is basically globalization, the drive towards market integration, technology, making everything interconnected, maybe even homogenous. One big global market.
And jihad, that's the opposite force.
It represents that fragmentation. Tribalism, groups defining themselves by being different, pushing back against that global tide, often based on exclusion, sometimes violently.
And the key is they're happening at the same time. Integration and disintegration side by side.
Making governing incredibly difficult. So our goal here is to unpack those two big forces, globalization, McWorld, and fragmentation, jihad, and look at their economic, political, and cultural sides.
Got it. Let's start with globalization then, the pressure from above, McWorld. After the Cold War, there was this idea, Fukuyama's end of history, right?
Right. The thinking was liberal democracy, free markets. That was it, the winning formula. Globalization became the shorthand for this whole process of convergence.
Thomas Friedman called it an overarching international system. But we need to be a bit more precise.
Yeah, Steger's distinction is useful. Globalization is the process that growing worldwide interconnectivity. Globalism is more the ideology or the imagined endpoint, a fully integrated world.
And sometimes global stuff and local stuff mix in weird ways.
Globalization, Steger again, the thickening of the global-local nexus, global trends getting local twists.
Okay, so what's driving the economic part of this globalization?
The big engine is neoliberalism. It's basically taking classical liberal ideas about economic freedom, private property, minimal government.
And pushing them globally.
Exactly. Through this thing called the DLP formula.
DLP. Okay, break that down.
Simple enough. D is for deregulation, getting government rules off of businesses. L is for liberalization, opening up borders to trade and investment. And P is for privatization, selling state-owned companies to private hands.
And who pushed this formula?
Primarily, the big institutions set up after World War II, the Bretton Woods system, so the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and GATT, which later became the World Trade Organization, the WTO.
Right, and their combined effort pushing these neoliberal policies often onto developing countries needing loans. That was the Washington Consensus.
That's the term. The goal, or maybe the belief behind it, was market globalism.
Meaning?
The idea that if you just let the free market work globally, through free trade, foreign direct investment, FDI, it would create jobs, grow a middle class everywhere.
Which is seen as the bedrock for democracy, the rising tide lifts all boats idea.
That was the promise, yeah. That was the economic vision of McWorld.
Okay, that's the economic side. But politically, if these international bodies, the IMF, the World Bank, the UN, are getting stronger, does that weaken the state? Does it chip away at sovereignty?
It certainly poses a challenge. When states try to cooperate on global issues, climate change, pandemics, terrorism, that's global governance.
And that requires compromise, right? Giving up some control.
Inevitably. Plus, you have this explosion of non-state actors. Multinational corporations like Starbucks or Apple have huge influence. Individuals, too, think Elon Musk or Greta Thunberg. They operate across borders, influencing politics without being tied to one government.
And what about NGOs, non-governmental organizations?
Ah, yes. Groups like Greenpeace or Amnesty International, they might not have armies or huge budgets, but they wield significant power through moral authority, information campaigns, and global networks. They're key players in political globalization.
Interesting. Now, politically, the prediction was democratization would spread with globalization, but that hasn't quite happened everywhere, has it?
No, definitely not. We've seen a counter trend, the rise or perhaps the resilience of what's called bureaucratic authoritarianism.
Okay, what's that?
It's the idea that running a modern state is complex, so decisions should be made by, well, experts, technocrats, professional managers, not necessarily reflecting the messy will of the people.
So, efficiency over democracy.
Kind of. It's a model you see very clearly in places like China or arguably Russia. It presents a powerful, centralized alternative pathway, challenging that end-of-history idea.
Okay, let's shift to the third dimension, cultural globalization. The sources focus on flows, right? People and information.
Exactly. Big flows. First, the movement of people migration. And it's important to distinguish why people move.
Right. There's intentional migration, people choosing to move.
Yes, like immigrants seeking permanent residence or maybe temporary workers. Students are sometimes called sojourners. They plan to move.
And the other kind.
Unintentional migration. People forced to flee. That includes refugees who cross borders, people granted temporary asylum.
And also internally displaced people, IDPs. That's a crucial.
Absolutely crucial. These are people fleeing disaster or conflict, but they haven't actually crossed an international border.
And that matters why?
Legally, it matters hugely. Because they're still within their own country, they often fall outside the mandate of international refugee organizations. They can become invisible, legally speaking, despite facing terrible conditions, a real tragedy of the system.
Wow, okay. And the other big cultural flow? Information.
Oh, massive. The internet, social media, it's fundamentally changed how societies work, created this sort of divide between digital natives, people who grew up online, and digital immigrants who had to learn it later.
And this impacts politics directly.
Hugely. Look at the Arab Spring uprisings around 2011. Activists used social media like Twitter and Facebook and proxy servers to organize protests to get information out.
Even when governments tried to shut down the internet.
Yeah, sometimes that backfired.
Yeah.
Blocking access in some cases just made people angrier, pushed them offline and out into the physical streets, an unintended consequence, amplifying the very thing they tried to stop.
Okay, so that whole picture, economic integration, political challenges to sovereignty, cultural flows of people, and info that's the pressure from above, globalization, McWorld.
Right. Now we need to flip it. Look at the other force, the pressure from below, fragmentation, Barber's jihad.
So this is the opposite of convergence, things falling apart.
Exactly. The fracturing of those established orders, political, economic, cultural, we see it on different levels.
Like individually?
Yeah, some scholars call it the great unsettling, a sense of unease, maybe anxiety from all this rapid change, technology dependence. It can create this longing to go back to a simpler past.
And within countries, domestically.
Political systems seem to be fraying, traditional center-right, center-left parties losing support, people losing faith in the establishment.
And then there's that deliberate fragmentation, too, devolution.
Right, where central governments give more power to regional or local levels, often to satisfy minority groups or head off full-blown separatism.
And globally, fragmentation looks like
things like economic nationalism, countries putting up tariffs, protecting their own industries, pushing back against free trade, and a resurgence of geopolitics. Big power rivalries, heating up U.S. versus China, Russia versus NATO, impacting global stability.
Let's dig into the economic fragmentation. You said market globalism promised a rising tide. What went wrong?
Well, the data shows the benefits were incredibly uneven. Milanovic's research is key here. Yes, the very poor in developing countries saw gains, but
Oh,
the top 1% globally captured a huge amount of the wealth. And critically, the middle and working classes in many developed countries, they saw very little gain, sometimes even stagnation or decline. Think about U.S. median income struggling to get back to its 1999 level for years.
so the promise felt broken for a lot of people in richer countries.
Exactly, leading to this feeling of economic marginalization. Workers feeling like global forces, decisions made far away, control their lives, their jobs, and they have no say.
And that feeling, that's fertile ground for populism, isn't it?
Perfect ground. Populism, basically, is a political style that slams the elite, whoever they define that as,
Uh-huh.
and claims to speak for the true people. It taps directly into that sense of marginalization, and it exists across the political spectrum.
Okay, so there's leftist populism.
Right. This tends to focus on class. The enemy is the greedy capitalist elite, the corporations. The worker needs protecting. Immigration might be framed economically as a tool capitalists use to drive down wages, for instance.
And the other side, national populism, often called right-wing populism.
This is different. The focus shifts from class to the nation. The nation itself is under threat from globalist elites and often from immigrants or minorities, seen as culturally different.
So it uses nationalist language. Take our country back.
Exactly that kind of slogan. It usually identifies three main threats:
Yep.
economic threats from globalization, cultural threats from outsiders, changing the national identity, and security threats. It's fundamentally about defining who belongs and who doesn't. Exclusionary,
And this national populism has been pretty successful politically in recent years.
undeniably. It was a major driver behind Brexit in the UK. It helped fuel the election of leaders like Donald Trump in the US, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, and others. It connects that economic anxiety to cultural identity and national pride.
Okay, finally, societal fragmentation. How does that manifest?
We've seen waves of protests globally.
Mm.
It really kicked off after the 2008 financial crisis, peaked in the year of protests in 2019, and continued right through the pandemic.
And the pandemic protests were often about what? Freedom, government overreach.
Often framed that way, yeah.
Yeah.
Resisting lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine requirements, tapping into that anti-elite, anti-government sentiment that populism also fuels. It shows deep divisions within societies.
And the prime example of this societal split has to be Brexit, right? The UK leaving the EU.
It really is the case study, leaving a major supranational body. The drivers were complex, but core issues were definitely sovereignty, this desire to take back control of laws, borders.
And immigration. Concerns about the free movement of people within the EU.
Absolutely. And the consequences weren't just about trade deals. Huge domestic fallout, renewed calls for Scottish independence, massive problems figuring out the border in Northern Ireland, which are still ongoing.
Yeah.
It shows how fragmentation can tear at the themes of a state.
So it really brings us back to the start. We have McWorld pulling states into global networks and jihad pulling them apart from within and resisting from below. Why is comparing states still the job?
Because comparative politics covers this huge range: democracy, authoritarianism, conflict, identity, climate change responses. But its unique value is in understanding that paradox.
Yeah, so.
Well, globalization McWorld might make the world feel small or interconnected, but its actual effects, job losses, inequality, cultural changes, those are felt at ground level in states. States mediate those global forces.
In fragmentation.
Its impacts like economic hardship, fueling populism, or demands for devolution or even conflict, we understand those failures or pressures primarily through the lens of one state. The state is where these forces collide and where responses happen.
So it's the indispensable middle ground.
It's the crucial unit of analysis. And comparative politics, with its focus on systematic, careful comparison of both countries, is the tool we need to really understand why things happen differently in different places, even when facing the same global pressures. That's the core skill.
Okay. So to wrap up and leave our listeners thinking, we've talked about Barber's Jihad versus McWorld. We've seen states trying to manage both pressures, like during the pandemic. But here's the tough question. Which force, globalization or fragmentation, do you think will ultimately shape our post-pandemic world more profoundly? And maybe more importantly, what will governments, the central actors caught in the middle, have to do, or maybe sacrifice, to keep control amidst that squeeze?